You write that analysts across the financial world are scouring data for signs that AI is making the economy more productive. That's certainly the holy grail of new technology. Are they finding out that it is making us more productive? Is it making the economy more productive?
Well, that's the big question. So the question right now is, are we in a kind of a 1990s style tech boom where the economy grew, people's wages increased, but ultimately inflation didn't take off? So the Fed at that time was able to keep interest rates low. That's a benign outcome. Of course, the other side of the debate is actually we could be, even if we do get a so-called productivity gain where we all work smarter, that will be outweighed by job destruction and, of course, broader societal destruction that that kind of an AI revolution will bring. Now, you know, on paper, all of this is quite abstract. It sounds academic. What does an AI-driven productivity boom even mean? But these technological changes are happening fast, happening in real time, and hardly a week goes by now without somebody from the Federal Reserve commenting on how AI might impact the economy and how it may impact productivity. And then there's also a very salient political angle to it because Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, for example, he's pushing a line that we're in a Greenspan boom, and that just like back in the 1990s when technology drove economic growth out inflation and then Fed Chairman Greenspan held his nerve without raising interest rates, this time around the Fed shouldn't be worrying about inflation given what's going to be happening with productivity. They should go ahead and cut interest rates. So, as I say to you, it's somewhat of an academic, abstract debate, certainly not one on Main Street, but it's very, very important in terms of how this ultimately does diffuse through the entire economy.
You know, I also often wonder too, like how does the Federal Reserve and the regional banks, like how do they go about analyzing something like AI that some say we're still early on, that it's the spend, but we're waiting to really see the ROI for a lot of different companies and a lot of different industries?
Well, it's tricky. I mean, the concept of productivity is difficult to measure anyway. The statisticians will freely admit that. So when you try to nut out how exactly the LLMs or ChatGPTs and the like are impacting how we're all working, that kind of adds to what's already a complicated job. A lot of economists will tell you one of the biggest problems is we don't measure productivity correctly and we're not geared up to even measure AI. So just to be clear, there's going to be question marks over that. And then, anyway, it takes time for it to come through into data. It could take a year, several years before policymakers can look back and go, hey, look, actually back then the US economy was going through this major tech boom that did lift productivity, and that's why inflation stayed low, but we made the decisions we made at the time. So there's a lot of unknowns in this, but yep, sorry, go ahead.
No, I want to just jump in because in your story you mentioned Kevin Hassett, head of President Trump's National Economic Council, and he said AI is lifting worker productivity at a, quote, remarkable rate. BlackRock's executive Rick Reeder said, quote, we are in a productivity revolution. So are they doing that based on data?
So, I mean, there has been some uptick in productivity, and you're absolutely right. Some of these candidates for Fed chair have been explicit in the view that AI is already impacting productivity in a very positive way. And there are different ways you can slice and dice that, but I think perhaps more objective or impartial economists or observers make the point that I was trying to articulate there, that that's very possible, but we just don't yet know because it's very complicated to measure it, and they're trying to figure out how to gauge how it's impacting the economy and how it's diffusing through the economy. But let me be clear though, we all know, and everyone around us, that this kind of technology is being adapted everywhere at a very fast rate. I spoke to companies for this news article, spoke to one company who's in the HVAC space, and he explained to me how HVAC technicians are using his proprietary LLM software to help them on repairs to old equipment in houses around the country, and he said it saves them up to 8 hours a week. So we're in this dilemma. We're in a dilemma where we know the technology is being deployed, and we know people are using it, but we don't yet know just how it is impacting the economy, and that's the big question here.